The sun was setting over Pine Ridge neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Officer Wilson drove slowly down Maple Street, her eyes scanning the well-kept lawns and expensive homes. She'd been on the force for 6 years now and had developed what she called a sixth sense for people who didn't belong. That's when she spotted him. A tall black man in a tailored gray suit walking confidently down the sidewalk, checking his phone occasionally. Something about him made Officer Wilson frown. Pine Ridge was mostly white, and though she'd never admitted out loud, she felt certain this man was out of place. She pulled her patrol car alongside him and rolled down her window. "Excuse me, sir," she called out sharply. "Mind if I ask what you're doing in this neighborhood?" The man stopped walking and turned toward her with a surprised expression. He was around 40, with short cropped hair starting to gray at the temples and intelligent eyes that assessed her calmly. "I'm just heading home," he replied politely, gesturing vaguely down the street. "I live a few blocks from here." Officer Wilson didn't believe him. People like him didn't live in Pine Ridge. That thought flashed through her mind before she could stop it. She stepped out of her car. "I'm going to need to see some ID," she said, her hand resting casually near her belt. "We've had some break-ins reported recently." The man's expression changed subtly. "There haven't been any break-ins in this neighborhood for months," he said quietly. "I keep track of these things." "Sir, I'm not going to ask again," Officer Wilson said, her voice hardening. She stepped closer. "ID, now." A couple walking their dog slowed down across the street, watching the interaction. The man noticed them too and sighed, reaching slowly for his wallet. "I'm just trying to walk home after a long day," he said, his voice controlled but with an edge of frustration. "I've lived here for 3 years. Would you be stopping me if I looked different?" That question lit a fuse in Officer Wilson. Who was he to question her judgment? Her training? Her authority? "Don't make this difficult," she snapped, stepping even closer. "Hand over your ID and answer my questions. What's in your briefcase? Where exactly do you live? Who can verify you belong here?" The man's patience visibly thinned. "This is harassment," he said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong, and you know it. I'd like your badge number." Something in Officer Wilson snapped. In one quick movement, she grabbed his arm and pushed him against her patrol car. His briefcase fell to the ground, papers spilling out onto the pavement. "You don't make demands here," she hissed, twisting his arm behind his back. "I do." "You're hurting me," the man said through gritted teeth. "This is completely unnecessary." By now, several neighbors had gathered. Someone was recording with their phone. In the distance, another police car's siren wailed. "Jerry, is everything okay?" called an older woman from her porch across the street. The man looked up. "Mrs. Peterson, could you please tell this officer that I live at 824 Oakwood Drive?" The woman looked confused. "Of course you do. You're on the neighborhood committee, for goodness sake." Officer Wilson's grip loosened slightly as doubt crept in. The man carefully straightened up, brushing off his now wrinkled suit jacket. "Officer," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "my name is Jerome Taylor. I'm a lawyer, and I've lived in this neighborhood longer than you've been on the force. Tomorrow, I suggest you look me up in the department database. You might find it educational." He bent down to collect his scattered papers, his movements deliberate and dignified despite what had just happened. The growing crowd of neighbors murmured disapprovingly, at her, not him. Officer Wilson's radio crackled. Her supervisor was requesting her location. The situation had escalated beyond her control. "This isn't over," she muttered, trying to save face as she backed toward her car. Jerome Taylor looked her directly in the eyes. "No," he agreed calmly, "it certainly isn't." As Officer Wilson drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The neighbors had gathered around the man, checking if he was okay. Something uncomfortable twisted in her stomach, not quite regret, not quite fear, but something in between. She had no idea just how right she was. This wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Officer Wilson barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's face, Jerome Taylor, and the disappointed looks from the neighbors who had witnessed everything. Her phone had buzzed nonstop with messages from fellow officers about a video circulating online. She hadn't dared to watch it. Morning came too quickly. Wilson dragged herself out of bed, making coffee strong enough to strip paint. Today was the department-wide meeting to introduce the new police commissioner and the recently appointed chief of internal affairs. Any other day, she might have called in sick, but skipping this meeting would only make things worse. The station buzzed with activity when she arrived. Officers gathered in small groups, their conversations dropping to whispers as she passed. Wilson kept her eyes forward, ignoring the side glances and hushed comments. "Hear about the meeting?" asked Officer Chen, the only colleague who didn't seem to be avoiding her. Supposedly, this new internal affairs guy is tough as nails, came from Chicago with a reputation for cleaning house. Wilson nodded absently, her stomach churning. All she needed was some hard case watchdog looking over everyone's shoulders while this video was going around. The conference room filled quickly. Wilson slipped into a seat near the back, hoping to remain invisible. Captain Rodriguez stood at the front, checking his watch impatiently. "All right, everyone settle down," Rodriguez called out. "Commissioner Washington will be here any minute with our new chief of internal affairs." The door opened. Commissioner Washington, a stern woman in her 60s, entered first. "Good morning, officers," she said briskly. "I appreciate you all being here promptly. I'd like to introduce someone who will be working closely with all of you to improve our department's relationship with the community." Wilson's phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it, focusing on the doorway as a man in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit entered the room. Her blood turned to ice. Jerome Taylor walked confidently to the front of the room, carrying the same briefcase he'd been forced to pick up off the pavement just yesterday. There was no sign on his face that he recognized her specifically, but Wilson knew it was only a matter of time. "This is Jerome Taylor," Commissioner Washington continued, oblivious to Wilson's silent panic. "He's our new chief of internal affairs. Mr. Taylor has an impressive background: Harvard Law, 15 years as a federal prosecutor specializing in civil rights cases, and most recently, he led the reform initiative for the Chicago Police Department." Taylor smiled warmly at the room. "Thank you, Commissioner. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I believe in transparency, accountability, and second chances. My door is always open." His eyes scanned the room as he spoke, finally landing on Wilson. For just a fraction of a second, their gazes locked. She saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something unreadable. Wilson felt sweat beading on her forehead. She couldn't breathe. Around her, officers were nodding appreciatively at Taylor's words about building bridges with the community. "My first initiative," Taylor continued, "will be reviewing our current community engagement strategies, particularly in neighborhoods where trust in law enforcement has been damaged." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Taylor has already identified Pine Ridge as a priority area." A few heads turned toward Wilson. Her involvement in last night's incident wasn't public knowledge yet, but rumors spread fast in the department. As the meeting wrapped up, Wilson tried to slip out unnoticed, but Taylor's voice stopped her. "Officer Wilson? Could I have a word with you in my office, please?" The room fell silent. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. "Now?" Wilson managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't mind," Taylor replied pleasantly. "It won't take long." The walk to his office felt like a death march. Wilson's mind raced through her options, none of them good. She could resign, she could fight, she could beg for her job. Taylor closed the door behind them and gestured to a chair across from his desk. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his expression contemplative rather than angry. "Do you believe in fate, Officer Wilson?" he finally asked. The question caught her completely off guard. "Sir? Fate? Destiny? Whatever you want to call it." He sat down, folding his hands on the desk. "Yesterday, you and I had an encounter that could have ended very differently. Today, we find ourselves here." Wilson swallowed hard. "About yesterday, sir." Taylor held up a hand. "We'll get to that, but first I want to be clear about something. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to make real change. And sometimes, real change starts in the most unexpected ways." He slid a folder across the desk toward her. Wilson stared at it, afraid to open it. "Your new assignment," Taylor explained. "Effective immediately." Wilson stared at the assignment folder in disbelief. Community outreach in Riverdale, the predominantly black neighborhood on the other side of town. Of all places, Taylor was sending her there. "This is punishment," she said, looking up from the papers. Taylor leaned back in his chair. "Is that what you think? That I'm punishing you? What else would you call it?" Wilson's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "I call it an opportunity," Taylor replied. "The video of our encounter has over 50,000 views now. By tomorrow, it'll be more." Wilson's stomach dropped. "Sir, about that." "You have two options," Taylor interrupted. "Option 1, I open a formal investigation. You're suspended pending review. Given the clear evidence, you'd likely lose your badge." He paused. "Option 2, you take this assignment. 6 months minimum. You work directly with community leaders in Riverdale. You learn their names, their stories. You become a bridge, not a barrier." Wilson's throat felt dry. "And then what?" "After 6 months, this all goes away." Taylor's expression hardened slightly. "Nothing goes away, Officer Wilson. Actions have consequences. But how we respond to those consequences, that's what defines us." The next morning, Wilson parked her personal car outside the Riverdale Community Center. Taylor had been clear: no uniform, no patrol car. She was here as a person first, an officer second. The center's director, Mrs. Jackson, was waiting for her. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. She didn't offer a smile or a handshake. "Mr. Taylor called me yesterday," Mrs. Jackson said, leading Wilson through the building. "Told me all about you." Wilson winced. "Everything." "Enough." Mrs. Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. "Let me be clear. I agreed to this because Jerome Taylor is a man I respect. But you haven't earned 1 ounce of my trust yet." Throughout that first day, Wilson was introduced to staff members who greeted her with cold politeness. She helped sort donations for the food bank, organize books for the after-school program, and sat silently through a community safety meeting where residents shared stories of police encounters that made her skin crawl with recognition. No one mentioned the video, but their eyes said they knew. By the end of the week, Wilson had settled into a routine. Mornings at the center, afternoons visiting elderly residents who needed help with groceries or home repairs. The work was exhausting in a way that patrol never had been, emotionally draining, forcing her to connect with people she would have previously driven past without a second glance. Back at the station, Wilson's locker had been vandalized with the word "Senai Tiche" scrawled across it in black marker. Though she hadn't reported anyone, her fellow officers assumed she was tailless by now. Officer Chen was the only one who still spoke to her. "Rough assignment?" he asked, finding her alone in the break room. "Different," Wilson admitted. "Not what I expected." "Word is Taylor's reviewing every complaint filed against the department in the last 5 years," Chen said, lowering his voice. "Reynolds and Gutierrez are freaking out." Wilson knew why. Both officers had records of excessive force complaints, always dismissed by the previous administration. "Good," she said before she could stop herself. Ken raised an eyebrow. "Wow. A week in Riverdale and you're already drinking the Kool-Aid." Wilson didn't answer. The truth was more complicated. Yesterday, she'd helped a teenager named Deshawn with his college application essay. The boy had dreams of becoming a doctor, despite growing up in a neighborhood where sirens were more common than silence. He told her how he always kept his hands visible when police were around, how his mother had trained him since he was 9 years old to move slowly, speak politely, never argue, even when he was right. It was the same speech Wilson's father had given her brother before he left for college, she realized with a jolt. The same fears, just different sides of the badge. On Friday afternoon, Wilson was helping with the center's youth basketball program when someone called her name. She turned to see a group of teenagers pointing at a phone screen, then at her. "That's her," one boy said loudly. "That's the cop from the video." The gym fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Kids, volunteers, parents. Wilson felt her face burning with shame. Mrs. Jackson appeared at her side. "Malik, put the phone away," she said firmly to the teenager. "But Mrs. J, she's the one whoa." "I know exactly who she is," Mrs. Jackson interrupted. "And she's here every day trying to do better. Are you going to give her that chance, or have you already decided she can't change?" The boy looked confused, then slightly embarrassed. He pocketed his phone and mumbled something that might have been an apology. Later, as Wilson was leaving, Mrs. Jackson stopped her. "Don't think that was me defending you," the older woman said. "That was me defending them. Teaching them that people can grow, even people who've hurt them." Wilson nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "See you Monday," Mrs. Jackson added, her expression softening just slightly. "We're starting the mentorship program. I think you should work with Malik." As Wilson drove home, her phone buzzed with a text message from Taylor. "Progress report meeting. My office. 8 a.m. Monday." The knot in her stomach tightened. After just 1 week, she already had more to report than she ever expected. The police station felt different on Monday morning, colder somehow. Wilson walked through the hallway with her head down, clutching a folder of notes she'd prepared for her meeting with Taylor. She'd spent Sunday organizing her thoughts, trying to find the right words to describe her first week in Riverdale. As she passed the break room, she overheard voices. "Taylor's out for blood," said Officer Reynolds. "Martinez got called in Friday. Came out looking like he'd seen a ghost." "It's a witch hunt," Officer Gutierrez replied. "We're just doing our jobs, and now this guy comes in thinking he can change everything overnight." Wilson paused outside the door listening. "You know who's to blame," Reynolds continued, lowering his voice. "If Wilson hadn't messed up with that guy, none of this would be happening. Taylor's using her screw-up as an excuse to come after all of us." "I heard she's feeding him information," Gutierrez added, "telling him who to investigate next." Wilson's cheeks burned. She'd spoken to Taylor exactly once since starting at Riverdale, and she certainly hadn't named any officers. She took a deep breath and walked into the break room. The conversation stopped immediately. Reynolds and Gutierrez stared at her with undisguised hostility. "Morning," she said, heading for the coffee machine. Neither responded. Reynolds knocked his shoulder against hers as he left. Gutierrez followed, muttering something under his breath. Wilson poured her coffee with a shaking hand. She'd known it would be tough, but she hadn't expected to become the department pariah quite so quickly. Officer Chen appeared in the doorway. "They're just scared," he said. "Reynolds has 3 excessive force complaints that got buried last year." Wilson stirred her coffee. "I'm not feeding Taylor information." "I know," Chen shrugged, "but they need someone to blame." When Wilson arrived at Taylor's office, she was surprised to find he wasn't alone. Captain Rodriguez sat in one of the chairs, along with a woman Wilson didn't recognize. "Officer Wilson," Taylor greeted her. "This is Rita Mendez from the Civilian Review Board. She's helping me review department policies." Wilson shook the woman's hand, wondering why she was included in what she thought would be a private meeting. "Have a seat," Taylor said. "Before we discuss your progress in Riverdale, there's something you should know. Several officers have approached Captain Rodriguez with concerns." Wilson's stomach dropped. "Concerns?" "They believe you're providing me with information about your colleagues," Taylor said, "specifically targeting certain officers for investigation." "That's not true," Wilson said quickly. "I haven't." Taylor held up a hand. "I know. I'm telling you this because it illustrates the problem we're facing. Rather than examining their own conduct, these officers are looking for someone to blame." Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. "There's more." A group of officers led by Reynolds and Gutierrez is putting together a formal complaint against Mr. Taylor. They're claiming he's creating a hostile work environment by bringing in outside oversight. Wilson couldn't hide her surprise. "They can do that." "They can try," Rita Mendez said with a small smile. "It won't go anywhere, but it shows the resistance to change." Taylor looked at Wilson. "And now, your progress report. How was your first week?" Wilson opened her folder. "Different than I expected. The community, they know who I am. They've seen the video." "And how does that make you feel?" Taylor asked. "Exposed," Wilson admitted. "Judged." "Interesting choice of words," Taylor noted. "Continue." Wilson described her experiences at the community center, her conversations with Mrs. Jackson, and the incident with Malik at the basketball program. As she spoke, she realized how much had happened in just 1 week. "Mrs. Jackson wants me to mentor Malik," she finished. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. He clearly doesn't trust me." "Which is precisely why it's an excellent idea," Taylor replied. "Mrs. Jackson sees something worth salvaging in both of you." After the meeting, Wilson headed to her car. In the parking lot, she found a small group of officers gathered around Reynolds. They fell silent as she approached. "We know what you're doing," Reynolds called out, "telling Taylor all about us while you play sight in Riverdale." Wilson kept walking, but Reynolds stepped into her path. "You think you're better than us now?" he demanded. "One mistake and suddenly you're the poster child for reform." "I'm just doing my assignment," Wilson said quietly. "Your assignment?" Reynolds laughed. "You're Taylor's puppet, his token white cop to parade around Riverdale." Wilson felt something snap inside her. "No, I'm the cop who made a mistake and is trying to learn from it." "What are you doing, Reynolds?" "Besides hiding complaint files and intimidating rookies." The words came out before she could stop them. Reynolds' face darkened. "You just proved my point," he said. "Watch your back, Wilson. This department has ways of dealing with traitors." That afternoon in Riverdale, Wilson couldn't focus. Reynolds' threat echoed in her mind as she sat with Malik, supposedly helping him with college research, but really just staring blankly at the computer screen. "You okay?" the teen asked, surprising her. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her. "Yeah, just work stuff," Wilson replied. Malik studied her for a moment. "My brother says cops have it hard too. Pressure from both sides." Wilson looked at him curious. "Your brother?" "He's studying criminal justice at State," Malik explained. "Wants to be a detective someday." "Our mom's not happy about it." "Why not?" Malik shrugged. "Same reason she wasn't happy when I told her you were gonna be my mentor. Says the system can't be fixed from inside." Wilson didn't know how to respond to that. She'd never thought of policing as a system before, just a job, a calling. But looking at Malik, she wondered if he was right. Was she trying to fix something broken, or just playing a part in Taylor's performance? On her way out, Mrs. Jackson handed her a flyer. "Community forum tomorrow night. The police commissioner will be there. And Chief Taylor." Wilson took the flyer. "Is my presence required?" "Not required," Mrs. Jackson replied, but noticed one way or the other. As Wilson drove home, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Officers meeting tonight. Parkview Bar, 8 p.m. Time to push back against Taylor. You coming?" Wilson stared at the message for a long time before replying, "I'll think about it." Wilson sat in her car outside Parkview Bar for 20 minutes, watching officers arrive. Reynolds, Gutierrez, Thompson, Miller, all the old guard. A few newer officers too, looking nervous but determined. Part of her wanted to join them, to feel like she belonged somewhere again. The other part remembered Malik's face when he recognized her from the video. She started the engine and drove away. The next morning, Wilson arrived at the community center earlier than usual. The night's restless sleep had left her with dark circles under her eyes and a headache that wouldn't quit. "You look terrible," Mrs. Jackson said, appearing with a cup of coffee. "Rough night." Wilson accepted the coffee gratefully. "You could say that." "Second thoughts about your assignment." "Something like that." Mrs. Jackson studied her for a moment. "Come with me. There's someone you should meet." They walked through the center to a small office in the back. An elderly woman sat sorting photographs into albums. She must have been in her 80s, her hands spotted with age but still steady. "Mrs. Thomas, this is Officer Wilson," Mrs. Jackson said. "The one I told you about." Mrs. Thomas looked up, her eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Sit down, child. Let me show you something." Wilson sat, unsure what to expect. Mrs. Thomas pushed an old photo album toward her. "That's my son, Robert," she said, pointing to a smiling young man in a graduation cap and gown. "Valedictorian. Got a full scholarship to State University." Wilson nodded politely. "That's wonderful." "He never made it to his first semester," Mrs. Thomas continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Got pulled over one night. Officer said he fit the description of a robbery suspect. Robert tried to explain he was just heading to his girlfriend's house to celebrate." Wilson's throat tightened as she realized where this story was going. The officer claimed Robert reached for something, shot him 3 times. Mrs. Thomas turned the page to a newspaper clipping. No weapon found. No charges filed against the officer. They said he followed protocol. Wilson stared at the faded newspaper, unable to speak. "That was 37 years ago," Mrs. Thomas said. "You know what I did after I buried my son? I started the Mothers for Justice group. We pushed for better training, for accountability. Most officers hated us, said we were troublemakers. She closed the album gently. But a few, just a few, listened, and those few made all the difference. Wilson swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Because you're at a crossroads, young lady. Mrs. Jackson says you're being pulled in two directions. Your fellow officers want you to choose sides. And you don't? Wilson asked. Mrs. Thomas smiled sadly. I want you to understand there are no sides, only people. My Robert was no different from your brother or son. The officer who shot him was someone's child too. Wilson spent the rest of the morning helping Mrs. Thomas organize her archives, decades of community activism, protests, meetings with city officials, small victories, and heartbreaking setbacks. The history of Riverdale told through one woman's determination. By afternoon, Wilson was scheduled to help with the youth program. Today, they were preparing for the community forum, making signs and practicing questions for the police commissioner. Malik worked silently beside her, arranging chairs. You coming tonight? He finally asked. I think so, Wilson replied. Aren't you? Got a question for that new chief, Malik said. Want to know if he's for real or just another suit making promises. Wilson almost smiled. He's for real. How do you know? She hesitated. Let's just say he had the chance to fire me and he didn't. Malik considered this. My brother says sometimes keeping someone around is harder than kicking them out. Your brother sounds pretty smart. Don't tell him that. Malik almost smiled. His head's big enough already. That evening, the community center filled with residents, media, and a handful of uniformed officers standing awkwardly along the walls. Commissioner Washington arrived first, followed by Captain Rodriguez and several city council members. Taylor entered last, stopping to shake hands and chat with residents as if he'd known them for years. When he spotted Wilson, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Mrs. Jackson called the meeting to order. We're here tonight to discuss the future of policing in our community. For too long, Riverdale has been over-policed yet underprotected. We have questions and we expect answers. The forum began with prepared statements, but quickly moved to community questions. Residents spoke about feeling targeted, about calling for help that came too late or not at all. Wilson listened, really listened for the first time. What about accountability? A woman asked. The officer in that viral video, pushing around a man for just walking in his own neighborhood, what happened to her? The room went quiet. Wilson felt dozens of eyes turned toward her, suddenly recognizing her out of uniform. Commissioner Washington cleared her throat, but Taylor raised his hand. That's a fair question, he said, and while I can't discuss specific personnel matters, I can tell you this. Accountability isn't just about punishment. It's about growth and change. He looked directly at Wilson. Would you like to address this? Wilson froze. This wasn't part of her assignment. She glanced at Mrs. Thomas, who gave her a slight nod of encouragement. Slowly, Wilson stood up. Her heart hammered in her chest. My name is Officer Wilson, she began, her voice shaking slightly. And I'm the officer from that video. A murmur swept through the crowd. Malik's eyes widened in recognition. What I did was wrong, Wilson continued. I acted on assumptions and bias instead of facts. I'm here in Riverdale now, not as punishment, but because I need to learn, to listen, to do better. She took a deep breath. I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to move forward in a way that acknowledges the harm and works to prevent it from happening again. As she sat down, the room remained silent. Then Mrs. Thomas stood up. 37 years I've been coming to these meetings, the elderly woman said. First time I've ever heard an officer admit they were wrong. It's a start. Across the room, Wilson noticed Officer Chen slipping in at the back, out of uniform. Their eyes met briefly before he gave her a small nod of support. The meeting continued, but something had shifted. The questions became less accusatory, more focused on solutions. When Malik finally stood to ask his question, Wilson held her breath. Chief Taylor, the teenager said clearly, how do we know things will actually change this time? Taylor considered the question carefully. We don't. Change isn't something I can promise you. It's something we build together, every day, through actions, not words. He glanced at Wilson. Sometimes it starts in the most unexpected places. After the forum ended, Wilson found herself surrounded by residents, some curious, some still suspicious, but all wanting to be heard. She listened to their stories until her voice grew hoarse from responding. As the crowd thinned, Taylor approached her. "You did well tonight." "Did I?" Wilson asked. "I'm not sure what I accomplished." "You showed up," Taylor said simply. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." Officer Chen joined them, hands in his pockets. "Reynolds is filing that complaint tomorrow. He's got 15 signatures." Taylor nodded, unsurprised. "And what about you, Officer Chen? Where do you stand?" Ken glanced at Wilson, then back to Taylor. "I think I'd like to learn more about the community outreach program." Wilson couldn't help but smile. One small victory in a sea of resistance. It wasn't much, but as Mrs. Thomas had said, it was a start. 3 months had passed since Wilson's first day at the Riverdale Community Center. The cold winter had given way to spring, bringing fresh paint to the basketball court and new flowers in the center's small garden. Wilson arrived early, as had become her habit, carrying a box of donuts for the morning staff meeting. "You're spoiling us," Mrs. Jackson said, though she didn't hesitate to take a chocolate glazed. Wilson smiled. These small gestures had become important to her, ways of showing appreciation that went beyond words. The center felt familiar now, almost comfortable. She knew the names of the regulars, the schedules of the programs, the quirks of the ancient coffee machine that only worked if you jiggled the plug. "Chief Taylor called," Mrs. Jackson mentioned between bites. "He wants to see you at the station this afternoon." Wilson's smile faded. Though she still technically reported to Taylor, their interactions had been minimal in recent weeks. Each time she entered the police station, she felt like a stranger in a place that had once been her second home. "Did he say why?" she asked. Mrs. Jackson shook her head, "Just that it's important." That morning, Wilson helped Malik practice his college interview skills. The teenager had come a long way from the suspicious boy who'd confronted her months ago. He'd recently been accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, not enough to cover everything, but a start. "What if they ask why I want to study criminal justice?" Malik asked, fidgeting with his tie. "Tell them the truth," Wilson suggested. "That you want to make things better." Malik nodded thoughtfully. "My brother says I should mention you." Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yeah, he says my mentorship with that cop who admitted she was wrong makes a good story." Malik grinned. "Shows I can work with difficult people." Wilson threw a crumpled paper at him, and they both laughed. These moments of easy camaraderie had become precious to her, hard-won trust that she didn't take for granted. At noon, Wilson drove to the station, her stomach nodding with familiar tension. The complaint against Taylor had gained momentum in recent months. Reynolds and his supporters had become increasingly vocal, writing letters to the mayor and giving anonymous quotes to local newspapers about lowered department morale. Officer Chen met her in the parking lot. "Heads up," he said in a low voice. "Reynolds is on the warpath. The investigation into his excessive force complaints is moving forward." Wilson nodded her thanks. Chen had become an unexpected ally, one of 3 officers who now volunteered regularly at the community center. Small changes, but significant ones. Taylor's office door was closed when she arrived. Through the glass, she could see him in serious conversation with Commissioner Washington and Captain Rodriguez. None of them looked happy. When she was finally called in, Wilson was surprised to see a 4th person in the room, Rita Mendez from the Civilian Review Board, the same woman who had been present at her first progress meeting. "Officer Wilson," Taylor greeted her. "Thank you for coming in. Please sit down." Wilson took the empty chair, glancing around at the serious faces. "Is something wrong?" "We've received a formal complaint," Taylor said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Against you." Wilson stared at the folder in confusion. "Against me? From who?" "Officer Reynolds claims you've been sharing confidential department information with community members in Riverdale," Captain Rodriguez explained. "Specifically, details about ongoing internal investigations." Wilson's confusion turned to anger. "That's ridiculous. I haven't shared anything confidential." "We know," Commissioner Washington said. "But Reynolds has gathered several officers willing to testify that you've been undermining department morale and, quote, working against the interests of law enforcement." "This is retaliation," Wilson said, her voice rising. "Because of the forum." Because I admitted I was wrong. Taylor held up a hand. We're aware of the context, but we need to follow proper procedures. The complaint has been filed formally. So what happens now? Wilson asked, trying to keep her voice steady. You have a choice, Taylor said. We can open a formal investigation during which you be temporarily reassigned to desk duty. Or, Wilson prompted when he paused. Or you can request a transfer, Commissioner Washington finished. To another district. Clean slate, fresh start. Wilson looked between them in disbelief. You want me to leave? After everything I've done in Riverdale? No one wants you to leave, Taylor said quietly. But we need to consider all options. What about my work at the center? My mentorship with Malik? Someone else would take over, Captain Rodriguez said, not meeting her eyes. Wilson stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is wrong, and you know it. Reynolds is trying to silence me because I'm a threat to the old way of doing things. Taylor's expression remained maddeningly calm. Officer Wilson. No, she interrupted. I'm not running away. I'm not transferring. If Reynolds wants a fight, then let's have one. Open the investigation. After she left, Wilson drove aimlessly, too upset to return to the center. She found herself at the small park where she'd first confronted Taylor 3 months ago. She sat on a bench, watching children play on swings while their parents chatted nearby. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Jackson. Heard what happened. Come back to the center when you're ready. We've got your back. Wilson smiled despite herself. 3 months ago, she had no one. Now, ironically, her only allies were in the community she'd once viewed with suspicion. As evening approached, Wilson finally returned to the center, where she found Mrs. Thomas and Mrs. Jackson waiting in the office. Reynolds came by looking for you, Mrs. Jackson said, asking questions about what information you've shared. Wilson groaned. This is getting out of hand. It's getting exactly as out of hand as it needs to, Mrs. Thomas said firmly. Change doesn't come easy, child. You're threatening the status quo. I didn't ask for this fight, Wilson protested. None of us do, Mrs. Thomas replied. But here we are anyway. That night, Wilson sat in her apartment reviewing the formal complaint. Reynolds had been thorough, gathering statements from officers claiming they'd overheard her disparaging the department to community members. Most were exaggerations or outright lies, but there was just enough truth, her criticisms of department policies, her growing relationships in Riverdale, to make it difficult to dismiss entirely. A knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she was shocked to see Taylor standing in the hallway. May I come in? He asked when she opened the door. Wilson hesitated, then stepped aside. Taylor entered, declining her offer of coffee. I'm not supposed to be here, he said without preamble. Our conversation needs to remain between us. Wilson crossed her arms. Then why are you here? Because I need you to understand something. Taylor's expression was more serious than she'd ever seen it. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about the entire reform effort. Reynolds is coming after me to get to you, Wilson said. Taylor nodded. Precisely, and he's not alone. There's significant pressure from the police union, from city officials who were comfortable with the old system. So what am I supposed to do? Give up? Transfer out? No, Taylor said firmly. You fight, but you fight smart. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small recording device. Reynolds approached a community member last week, offering to drop charges against their son in exchange for false testimony against you. Wilson stared at the device. Is that? A recording of the conversation. Obtained legally with the community member's full cooperation. Why are you giving this to me? Taylor's eyes met hers directly. Because sometimes you need to fight fire with fire. And because I believe in you, Officer Wilson. I have from the beginning. As he turned to leave, Wilson found her voice again. That night in Pine Ridge, she said. Did you know who I was when you approached me? Taylor paused at the door. Would it matter if I did? The question hung in the air between them, unanswered as he walked away. 6 months after that night in Pine Ridge, the police department gathered for its annual community recognition ceremony. The large community hall was packed with officers in dress uniforms, local officials in suits and ties, and community members dressed in their Sunday best. Wilson sat in the back row, feeling oddly out of place in her uniform, which she now wore only for official functions. "Nervous?" Mrs. Jackson asked, sitting beside her. Wilson nodded. "A little." "You should be," Mrs. Jackson said with a small smile. "It's not every day you get the Community Bridge Builder Award." Wilson still couldn't believe the nomination. After the dust had settled from Reynolds' complaint, dismissed when the recording of his witness tampering came to light, Wilson had expected to return to her quiet work at the center. Instead, she'd found herself increasingly in the spotlight as community members spoke out about the positive changes they'd seen. Malik slipped into the seat on her other side, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed suit and tie. "You're late," Wilson whispered. "Bus was slow," he whispered back. "Did I miss anything?" "Just a lot of boring speeches." At the front of the room, Commissioner Washington approached the podium. "Today, we celebrate individuals who have gone above and beyond to strengthen the bond between law enforcement and the communities we serve." Wilson only half listened as various awards were presented: Officer of the Year, Volunteer Service Award, Youth Mentor Recognition. Her mind wandered to how much had changed in 6 months. Reynolds had resigned rather than face disciplinary action for witness tampering. Gutierrez had transferred to another district, and Officer Chen had recently been promoted to lead a new community policing initiative based on Wilson's work in Riverdale. And now, Commissioner Washington said, drawing Wilson's attention back to the ceremony, the Community Bridge Builder Award, presented to an individual who has demonstrated exceptional commitment to healing divisions between police and community. Chief Taylor stepped forward to present the award. He looked different somehow, more relaxed, more at home in his role than he had 6 months ago. This year's recipient, Taylor began, started out as the subject of a viral video that could have ended her career. Instead, it became the beginning of a remarkable journey. Wilson felt her cheeks grow warm as heads turned in her direction. Through honesty, humility, and a willingness to listen and learn, Officer Wilson has transformed not only herself, but helped transform an entire community's relationship with law enforcement. As Wilson walked to the front to accept the award, she was surprised by the applause, not just polite clapping, but genuine enthusiasm, especially from the Riverdale residents who had come to support her. "Thank you," she said, taking the small plaque. "But this doesn't belong just to me. It belongs to Mrs. Jackson, who gave me a chance when she had every reason not to. To Mrs. Thomas, who shared her painful story and helped me understand the true meaning of justice. To Malik, who challenged me every day to be better." She paused, looking directly at Taylor. "And to Chief Taylor, who could have fired me that first day, but instead saw something worth saving." Later, at the reception, Wilson found a quiet corner away from the congratulations and photo opportunities. Taylor joined her, 2 cups of punch in hand. "Not enjoying your moment in the spotlight?" he asked, offering her a cup. Wilson shook her head. "Just needed a breather. It's a lot." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "I never answered your question," Taylor said finally, "about whether I knew who you were that night in Pine Ridge." Wilson looked at him curiously. "And I knew exactly who you were," Taylor admitted. "I'd reviewed your file when I accepted the position. 5 years on the force, 14 commendations, 3 complaints of excessive force, all dismissed without investigation." Wilson winced at the last part. "So what? You set me up. Walked around my neighborhood hoping I'd stop you." "No." Taylor shook his head. "I was genuinely heading home from a dinner meeting, but when I saw you watching me, I recognized you from your file photo, and I decided not to make it easy for you." "Why?" "Because I needed to know if the complaints in your file were isolated incidents or part of a pattern," Taylor said. "I needed to see who you really were when confronted with your own biases." Wilson processed this information. "You took a big risk. I could have hurt you." "Yes," Taylor agreed. "But I also saw your hesitation, the moment you realized you might be making a mistake. That's why I offered you the assignment instead of firing you. I saw the potential for change." Before Wilson could respond, they were interrupted by Malik, looking excited. "They want a picture of us together," he said. "You, me, Mrs. Jackson, Mrs. Thomas, and the chief, for the community newsletter." Wilson smiled. "We'll be right there." As Malik hurried away, Taylor gave Wilson a questioning look. We good? She considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd felt betrayed, manipulated, angry at being made an example. Now, understanding Taylor's perspective, she felt something different, grateful for the opportunity he'd given her, even if his methods had been unconventional. We're good, she said. The photograph captured an unlikely group: the police chief, the officer who had once crossed the line, the community leaders who had given her a second chance, and the teenager who represented the future they were all working toward. Not perfect, not without tensions and unresolved issues, but a start. Later that evening, Wilson returned to the station to change before heading home. The building was quiet, most officers still at the reception or out on patrol. As she walked through the lobby, she noticed a young rookie officer, Officer Diaz, newly graduated from the academy, talking to a black teenager who looked upset. "What's going on?" Wilson asked, approaching them. "Nothing, ma'am," Officer Diaz said quickly. "Just a kid hanging around the station. Told him to move along." Wilson looked at the teenager more carefully. "Are you okay?" The boy hesitated. "I'm looking for my brother. He was supposed to meet me here an hour ago." "What's your brother's name?" Wilson asked. "Anthony Johnson. He works at the grocery store on Elm Street. He called and said some officers wanted to talk to him, but he didn't do anything wrong, I swear." Wilson turned to Officer Diaz. "Have you checked if anyone brought in a young man named Anthony Johnson?" Diaz shrugged. "I just started my shift. Not my problem if some kid's brother got picked up." Wilson felt a familiar tension in her chest, the old instinct to back up a fellow officer without question. But 6 months in Riverdale had taught her to listen first, to see the person behind the problem. "I'll help you look for your brother," she told the teenager. "What's your name?" "Carlos," the boy said, relief flooding his face. As Wilson led Carlos toward the front desk to inquire about his brother, she caught Officer Diaz watching her with a mixture of confusion and resentment, the same way she had once looked at Taylor. "Officer Diaz," she called over her shoulder. "Why don't you join us? Might be a good learning opportunity." The rookie hesitated, then reluctantly followed. One person at a time, Wilson thought. That's how change happens. Not all at once, not without resistance, but one conversation, one decision, one moment of choosing differently than before. It wasn't a perfect ending. There would still be difficult days ahead, officers who resisted change, community members who doubted her sincerity. But as she helped Carlos find his brother, detained due to a misunderstanding that Wilson was able to clear up, she knew she was on the right path. The journey that had begun with a viral video of her worst moment had led her here, to a place where she could help prevent someone else's worst moment from happening. And somehow, that made all the difference.